I think if I was young and starting a business right now and was smart enough to just be like, and I'm going to get a VA, and I can't imagine how successful that person could be.
Welcome into another episode of the NiceJob Podcast. I'm your host, Sean Hill. My guest today is co-owner of Home Service VA, Melody Edwards. In this episode, you'll learn how to find the challenges that are holding you back, how a virtual assistant could really change your entire life, and how you can outsource tasks without losing control. So let's dive into episode 77. Welcome everybody in to another episode of the NiceJob Podcast. Thank you for joining us back here in season 4, and we have a season 4. That story in itself for a future episode. We almost didn't come back, but I'm glad we did for a couple of reasons. One, it is truly an honor for me to be able to have these conversations and hopefully that you're getting some nuggets and some things to use in your own life and to use in your own business for them, because that's really why we're doing this whole thing. But the second thing is I didn't have the guest I'm about to have on yet. And that would have been a complete missed opportunity. We've crossed paths a couple of times, but finally I was able to get her down in the podcast chair, and we're going to have a great conversation. It feels weird to kind of limit to just one title, so I'll just start off with she's the co-owner of Home Service VA, but we can have a laundry list of things to call her. I'm just going to call her by her name. It's Melody Edwards. Melody, thank you so much for joining us here on the NiceJob Podcast.
Thanks so much, Sean. That was like the best introduction I think I've ever gotten.
I appreciate that. We always aim to please here, just on the podcast in general. But we're partway through as we get this episode here in 2022. The world around us still changing, still evolving, still kind of going through. You and I had a conversation in the early 2022. We had a chance to catch up, and at that point, you had some big plans, some big ideas. You're going forth with it. A slight little status update, without going too much into detail. How's 2022 been treating you thus far?
It has been awesome and a journey. And it's been many things. Let's just say that. But doing well. And
throughout the year, one of the things we talked about at the beginning of the year was you were kind of, I don't say embarking on a new path because I think it's kind of overstating it, but you were trying to find out how to take elements of your story, of your business, of your life, and really kind of present that out. But because there's so much relevant information, we were kind of having the conversation of how do I take everything that I think is important and pack it into one small thing? And we're kind of doing the same thing here in season 4. We're exploring customer-driven growth, all the elements that pertain to it, from the high-level definition to the nitty-gritty details of it. And Mel, the one reason I wanted to have you on the show here, pertaining to customer-driven growth, was the first part of kind of the basic process is that customer journey and is those initial experiences, for business owners and home services and across. And one thing that you have done is you started to take a unique look, or at least kind of your own perspective on elements of your own customer journey throughout your business, and one in particular, which is that initial contact, element, right? Like, what are people experiencing when they first contact your business? Before we dive into what exactly that manifests, going back a half a step, have you always been the type of person that is always testing, tinkering, and trying to look at a new angle, looking at something? Are you someone that's just not quite happy with the status quo?
I haven't always been like that. I don't even look at it like not happy with the status quo. I love being creative. It's like my whole heart is about creativity, and business is creative, as a creative outlet for me. I didn't actually start, I had bought a window cleaning company when I was 26, I believe, and I'd worked for that person for 9 years. He ran a very old school business. That is my introduction to business. And so there was no like YouTubes back then. I called it the YouTubes. There was nothing back then for me to learn from. And so I literally learned everything the hard way, and didn't even understand that business could be creative. And then cut to today, where I look at it as an adventure. Like, there's always different routes you can go. Everything is a lesson. It's something I really love. I don't know that answered your question, but
Yeah. It did, because you kind of took me through the whole process of it, right? So it's not like, all right, I was always settled, I'm always tinkering, right? Like if something's working and going, you're not just looking to shake it up just to shake it up's sake, but you also, you know, are exploring yourself within this as well. I think it's one thing with business owners is when you talk about systems, you talk about processes, you can't ignore the fact you as the individual implementing things like that. I myself have ADHD. Had it for a while, has changed as I become an adult. And one thing for me in particular has always been kind of a struggle when you talk about being creative and stuff like that, is you start to get into this almost executive dysfunction where you have a bunch of ideas, but you're having trouble executing, or you're in the middle of things and you're having kind of trouble progressing. And I know that you kind of talked about that. That's something that you've also kind of struggled with. And I think, you know, as I kind of see it, led you to that path to start looking into, as you talked about that first initial contact, but kind of the world of getting assistance, virtual assistance, and going through there. Could you talk or kind of dive us in a little bit of when you kind of started to realize that, hey, this maybe executive function struggles was, while unique to you, was not necessarily something that was completely unheard of?
Well, yeah. So I wasn't diagnosed until I was 30. And it was because I was running a business, I was raising a child, I was in school full time for like the 20th time. And I was like, why can't I be successful? Not realizing I was already pretty successful at what I was doing. But when you have ADD, it's like never at the level. Like there's so many things you want to do. And so I got diagnosed, and it really changed my entire life, honestly. Up until that point, I had always looked at myself as kind of, I can't fit in the box. Like I want to desperately fit in the box, whether it's about business, like doing things the way that, you know, a book might say, or if it's just in life, like I could never do it the way that other people seem to be able to do it, whatever it might be. And it gave me so much freedom to realize I wasn't stupid, that I wasn't like lazy. That's like pretty much the opposite of what I am. And it gave me the freedom to just kind of like, from that point on, it was like a full jump forward for me. And I've been on kind of a journey of self-exploration ever since, figuring out how basically to trick myself into doing the things that I want to do in the easiest way possible. And I think I've spent a lot of time probably overanalyzing and being very self-aware. But I'm also somebody who doesn't mind being vulnerable. So I talk about this very openly with a lot of people, because I think especially in home services, it's always been a place where people are kind of, you know, there's a lot of ego there. And it's getting better, but it's kind of always been the Wild West. There's a lot of ego. And so as I've gained confidence in my life, I've realized there are people who need to understand this about themselves, just as I learned it about myself. And then I can teach them ways to take the tools that I've learned, the tricks that I've learned, and just change somebody's life the way that it changed my life. And one of those is a virtual assistant. And it's an executive assistant for me. When I was in business, you know, in my 30s, I always had an office assistant. And the way that I looked at that expense was that was the part of business I hated the most. And so their salary, though I could not afford it, I've heard people say, don't get an office assistant until you're making 300,000 or bringing in that much in revenue or whatever the number is. I've never looked at it that way. You know, I had a young child, I had 2 children, and I was like, how can I make this work? Having an office assistant made it work, and it was worth every penny. When I went virtual, it was because I could not focus when an in-person office assistant was around. For my ADD, it was just very distracting, and virtual works way better for me.
I definitely want to circle back to that point, because it's a unique thing about the environment you're in as an ADHD or ADD individual, and somehow that even the benefits can kind of become distractions or hurdles just because of the environment. But you talk about virtual assistants, and you talked also about ego.
Yeah.
It's funny that that's how virtual assistants sometimes get perceived, is through that egotistical lens, which is either A, I'm outsourcing the thing for like the cheapest, quickest, whatever, because I don't want to do it, or it's beneath me, honestly. Right. Sometimes the opinion you sort of get. And then the other part of it is that people go, I don't want to do a virtual assistant because I need that. I need to see that control. I need to see that focus. I don't know if they're going to do it my way. I don't know if they're going to do that. And
Yes.
oftentimes that leads to not only not making the choice to have a virtual assistant, but often leading down the wrong path, right? And having the wrong virtual assistant. Is that, do you see that the biggest, like when you started looking at going into this sort of venture, like those were the two big pillars you had to knock down first?
Well, the way that I started our company, Home Service VA. So first of all, my business partner is my former virtual assistant. And so we work really well together. We trust each other implicitly. It's a great relationship. And what works about that is I handle the American side, she handles the Filipino side. I think what I realized was that I needed help, but I could not probably always afford the level of help that I needed, right? Virtual assistants are less money than American workers, especially when we don't have a lot of people here who are able to do the jobs right now. I mean, there's a worker shortage. So it made sense to me, but I was terrified to take it on. I'd always done part-time Fiverr project-based things with VAs. So I had experience with VAs, but I didn't have experience with the full-time. I could not even imagine how it could work. And it was my business coach, Kedma O, who was like, you need this, just do it. She kind of led me down the path. And once I did it, I was hooked because I'm actually I like to say that I'm very bad at following systems, but I'm very good at creating simple systems for the people around me to follow. And so because of that, I was able to do it really well. I was very successful at having a VA. I think I'm very emotionally intelligent, and I've traveled a lot. So I understand that in the world, people are people. And I'm not afraid of, trying somebody from a different culture because I have recognized that everybody is pretty much the same. It's just there are intercultural differences that come up. And so when I started thinking about this business with Dean, it was, how can we do this in a way that will support people like me, like who don't know how to do it, who struggle with systems. Like a lot of people, once I learned how to do systems in a very simple way, I was like, this is amazing. And it was so easy after that. But a lot of people don't even get started because they're scared of it. And I spent 10 years trying to make systems and like so many others, and just struggling to figure out how to do that. It's because I'm not a writer. I'm a talker. I like to talk things out. So that's kind of what we've built, is a system to support. We're not an agency. We are really a recruiter. We're a matchmaker, and we're matching up the right people to your company. We are caring about personalities, and we're really trying to compress the amount of time it takes for a business owner to trust a virtual assistant. And I've created a lot of simple tricks to make that happen for people.
Something you said caught my ear and intrigued me there. You talked about you felt you had the ability to kind of build smaller systems for others, but had trouble following it yourself. That really identifies with me because I feel like that's where I always felt why I'm a really great leader. And sometimes I look at, quite honestly, a little imposter syndrome sometimes while doing my job, because I'm like, I can't actually handle all this, but I know it will work for you, and I can tell you how to work for you, and I can adjust to make it work for you.
Yeah.
Was that like an epiphany for you to try to figure out like how to get to the next step, or was that something that you're still able to rely on now? Like, you know what, at worst case, I do know that's a skill in my back pocket that even if I haven't quite figured it out how to do it on my own, if I kind of, oddly enough, trust my own process, I'll get there. But I still want to be, on the leader perspective, build those micro things. Because I'm interested, because for me, I don't know if you felt the same way, like I would fight that imposter syndrome even though I felt I was a good leader.
I still fight that imposter syndrome. Having ADD, not being diagnosed with it till I was much older, I feel like there's a lot of self-esteem issues that came from that I still actively have to work on all the time. I now feel like I'm a very smart, capable person. I think of things in a really creative way. There aren't a lot of women in the home service industries, especially window cleaning, which is where I came from. I could probably count on my hands how many female business owners there were like me. So trying to fit in or I didn't quite fit in. That's kind of always been a thing. So things that might work for the guys have not always worked for me. And I've just had to learn to trust my way of thinking, learn to trust that I am really good at like doing what you said, like creating the systems for other people. And I'm actually, the other thing is I always struggled with leadership. I always felt like, oh, I can't be a leader because of ego. I grew up feeling like modesty was a virtue, and therefore confidence is ego. In my, as a child, that's kind of how I looked at it. And so leadership is why I joined, coaching groups, is because I want to be a better leader. But I'm actually a natural leader, and I never quite realized that until I started looking at the things that people struggle with that I actually find to be very easy, like hiring and creating a culture. So easy for me. Everybody's complaining about it, and rightly so. But the way that I do it, it works. I never struggle with hiring or finding people. But it's because I'm willing to look outside of just the people I think fit into the thing that, I look outside of just people like me. And it allows more applicants.
And that has to be a huge advantage. You talk about recruiting for businesses, finding the right assistants and things like that. Without having to dive too deep in, obviously we're not kind of a pitch podcast, things like that, but I'm genuinely interested. I do know you get this question a lot, but so take us through the service level, like how that process is different. How is, coming through, you and your business there going to be different than if I'm just scrolling through, finding someone and just hooking up with whatever company I find first?
Well, I think one thing is I focused on home service for a reason. Because it's what I knew, and I figured I know this. I will work in this group. I can help these people, my people. So I understand the challenges of running a home service company. I've already had VAs in both of my home service companies previously and currently. So I'm really good at creating systems for a VA to integrate them right into the business itself. But I would say the biggest thing is that I train business owners how to work with a VA. I think it's so important to think about all of the mindset issues that you talked about up front. Needing to be in full control of your company. We oftentimes will overtrain or undertrain. Like we don't need to sit in Zoom for 10 hours with somebody, but we also need to give them some direction. So I really am very honest about some of the issues that come up and how they can avoid them and what they should be looking for. We create a training plan for them. So a VA is going to need a plan for their training. I don't think it's a good idea for anybody to just get a VA and then bring them on board if they've never had one before. They really should have something that the VA can be learning, because then you get your VA and then you're like, oh crap, I have to figure out how to make this relationship work. And if they haven't planned for it, a lot of times they'll ghost their VA, or they won't, the VA won't get the work that they want because they're eager to work, and then eventually they'll take a second job, and it just isn't good. I've seen all sorts of situations. So the training part, both on the side of the business owner and on the side of the VA, not training them on specific skills, but I'm kind of like, the way I think about it is I want to teach them how to work and train a VA so that they can do it again when they need to. If we do all that work for them, they're not going to be able to do it again in the future. And I like to help people figure that kind of stuff out because it feels complicated. There's a lot of emotion involved.
Which brings the question, we often get this, with NiceJob, is people say, all right, well, do I need X in place before I could use it? Or can I start getting advantage beforehand? Because it sounds like part of your process is like, well, I can't begin to start placing until I figure out kind of, who you are, kind of where you're at. But I wonder if someone listening to it is like, all right, well, I thought I needed a VA because I don't have my stuff together.
Yeah.
But I need to get my
no.
Like where is that that duality? Yeah. So is there a wrong stage to start this process of trying to look to implement?
Oh my gosh.
Like perhaps it's not, you're not hiring and throwing them on, answering calls right away, but is there a level you have to get to?
So no. I think if I was young and starting a business right now and was smart enough to just be like, and I'm going to get a VA, and I can't imagine how successful that person could be if they understood the value and didn't fear the cost, because that's a lot of times what people are facing, especially old timers like me, and people like me who are making changes. It's like so hard to make changes sometimes, but then we do it and we're like, oh, that wasn't so bad. I look at young people and they just do the change. But if somebody is trying to get started or is thinking about it, really what they should be doing is creating simple training videos for when they are doing the task that they do in their business. Let's say sending an email or, whatever it may be, doing the budget, whatever it is, just making a Loom video while they're doing it, and then keeping track of all those videos for the tasks that you want a VA to do. It's actually quite simple when you just look at it at that level. And most of the time, though, people don't know exactly what they want a VA to do or what a VA can do. And that's another struggle that people have. But it really is, like I just say, they can do almost anything. And I can't live without my executive assistant. She is my executive function. Like, she is my brain. Yeah. I call her the melody manager because she is literally my manager. And I have it's a joke, but it's also not a joke. And the other thing about VAs, especially Filipino VAs, I work with Filipino VAs because that's where Dean, my business partner, lives, and it makes sense for us to do that. But they tend to be a little shy. They're taking we train them about like how to deal with situations that come up, but we can't train them for everything. So I give permission a lot to my VAs to give me feedback, tell me what they're thinking. Because if you don't do that, if you don't continue to give permission like a lot longer than you should need to, they may not be giving you the full assessment of what they're thinking or seeing, just because in the Philippines, a boss is up high and a worker is down here, and they don't cross that line. Whereas I want an actual relationship with somebody who's going to have my back, and then I take care of them too.
That touches on that cultural element you talked about, right?
Yes.
So that can often be misinterpreted.
Yes.
It was like cold, it was distant. Like, well, no. Yes, you maybe had to give more permission that you might be used to than someone that was from right around the corner. But the eagerness, the willingness, and obviously the skill set, that is exactly what was also right around the corner. And I also, that touches on elements, obviously with our podcast, we're exploring different elements of customer-driven growth, but you hit on a couple of different things there in all of your answers, which is like, well, it's a key process, for you kind of in your business, like what these tasks are kind of taking over. But it's also about making sure that you're constantly, kind of getting feedback, but looking and realizing what's working, what's not, what needs minor tweaks, what needs a little bit more, but doing it not in a silo, by making sure you're kind of getting the collective together, which is obviously a huge element of customer-driven growth, but then obviously a huge element of what you're talking about as well. Because I like when you said, people sometimes aren't sure what they want their virtual assistant to do, because they always get caught in the high level of like, well, save me time. Like, all right, well, are you using that time valuably? Like, is that something that maybe if you did this task, it'd be way more valuable for you to do it than outsourcing it, or it might be able to kind of evolve more if that goes in or out or anything like that. Do you have any, say like key triples or key things? Like, is there the one thing that you hear a lot where people are like, I want this for my VAs, or I want that, and you would love just to now get out, open airways here and be like, hey, just so you know, like, that's not necessary, or even the other way, like, yep, you absolutely every time should do that.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I would actually say the opposite. A lot of people don't start with the thing that takes the most time for them, which is, in my business, it was always email. I really drove my customers. Like I'm a purpose-driven person. And so the purpose is making people happy, making people feel good. And so in any of my businesses, it's always been about that customer journey. But I did train my customers to do things through email because that was the easier way to communicate and to keep records and such things. So I have like thousands of emails in there. And I might have spent 20 hours a week on email. I could instantly get back 20 hours a week just by having a VA and training them to do email. Now with my process, I can get a VA trained on my email or anybody else's within a week, and you'll trust them to be taking over your email. And that's the thing that people are most scared of, I think, is doing that, because it feels so personal. How could they ever possibly understand how I write emails? And the answer is that you have them deep dive into your email. They find the common ways that you write, every time an estimate needs to go out to a new customer or somebody comes in, you always write the same kind of email. And a lot of people have templates, but not everybody has templates, right? But you're having these VAs create the templates, study your email. Every time they see a trouble, like something that's been a problem that you answered with a solution, that goes into a troubleshooting template guide. Every time there's a question, that goes into an FAQ guide, so that they have these tools that they're finding. You're not training them at all. They're training themselves. They're creating these templates. And once they hand them over to you and say, these are the templates, you go back and forth with them, let them correct it, but just kind of tell them how they're doing. Then they can start drafting once they have that in place. And when they're about 90%, like they're not sending your email yet, they're just starting to draft using those templates that you've approved. When they're at about 90% accuracy, and then that other 10%, they're asking you questions because they don't know how to do it, they can now send your email for you without any problems. And worst case scenario, if somebody writes and needs an immediate answer, or even calls is probably better, they can always say, that's a great question, I'll get right back to you. That's like, they don't have to have all the answers right away, as long as somebody knows that there will be an answer.
Yeah, and because you're also now setting an expectation in that communication thing of like, hey, listened, heard, actions happening, right? Because the worst thing besides, having a bad answer is having no answer sometimes, because that's the one thing that really breaks down communication when it comes to, clients, customers, even employees. It feels like people aren't heard, and it feels like action hasn't been taken. That's kind of a clear way to start waving a red flag in that sense. Melody, I know there's so much more we could scratch in and dive in, but as an ADHD person, I'm always making sure to keep things at a reasonable time frame.
Very smart.
But I want to ask you the question that we're going to ask all of our guests here in season 4. And don't worry, sometimes it takes a moment or two to kind of think about it, so feel free to take that moment here. But if someone was writing a review of you, so it could be personally, business-wise, or something like that, what sentence or phrase would you want to see included in that review?
I think that the best compliment or testimonial to me is when I hear that I've really helped somebody, or that I've changed the way they think about something, or I've made them feel more confident. So anything with any of those things in there will make me feel like a very happy person, and also allow other people to trust that my heart is in the right place.
Well, you know what? That's something I would definitely include in my review of you, Melody. So, I'll pass that along. If anyone listening to this podcast wants to find out either more about you, kind of get in touch, even just pick your brain a little bit, where should we direct them towards?
Well, I would say Facebook is where a lot of people find me, Melody S. Edwards. I'm really active on TikTok lately. I've been experimenting, and I've done pretty well. My TikTok is Light That Up. And then also homeserviceva.com. That's where people can find us.
And nice. And whether you're watching on YouTube, listening to any of our audio feeds, anything like that, we'll have those in the show notes, in the descriptions. We'll have some quick links for you. And I have a feeling I probably threw it on the screen while you were saying it as well in the edit there. Melody, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us here on the Nice Job Podcast. And I have a feeling if another topic comes up, I'll be giving you a call again to come back for a repeat visit. But I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sean. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for checking out the video. Remember, you can listen to the full episode of our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Buzzsprout, or wherever you get your podcasts. Here on YouTube, I want to invite you to subscribe by clicking right there, or you can check out 2 other videos. One, our most recent podcast, and the other to learn a little bit more about NiceJob. So click one of those things, and I can go home.